I am back, and my back is okay. Yeah, if you didn't hear, I hurt my back pretty bad. It's mostly recovered now. I'll be fine. And we have a lot to catch up on, but mainly I was long overdue for a new manga video, and as per usual, we have many to talk about today. Interesting how it worked out, because all three of these actually have a similar theme, which I think will make for an interesting discussion as we compare them all. I know many of you are probably wondering when I'm going to talk about Vinland Saga now that it's over. This is how far I am in the reread, about halfway through. It will not be long before you hear me talk about it, let me tell ya. But for now, we are going to be turning our heads back to shonen battle manga. All roads lead back to it, man. You can never escape it. But specifically the supernatural subgenre. Japan has very rich lore when it comes to spirits, and a lot of manga capitalize on them. Since the early days of manga, there have been aspects of folklore that have found its way into the stories, and in the modern day it continues to be a very popular subject of manga, especially with how globally popular manga has gotten in the past 10 years. But before we talk about more recent series, we're going to be going a bit further back, the olden times of 2011, when Noragami first released. Now, this was a series that I had always known about, and it was quite popular in the early 2010s, especially when it got an anime adaptation. And I'd always heard fantastic things about it, but for whatever reason, like even in the peak of my manga reading days, I never really checked it out. I did own a few volumes, I did like flip through them once, I thought it was cool, but for whatever reason I just never continued. You know, I guess my plate was just too full with other series, you know, the big ones people were currently talking about. Because people kind of stopped talking about Noragami, partly due to the long breaks between anime seasons, and also partly due to the manga itself going on very lengthy hiatuses. But it did eventually come back, and last year it finished. So eager to see what I was missing out on, I went back to the beginning and read the whole thing. So Noragami was brought to us by Adachi Toka, which is a pen name for a writer-artist duo, and it follows Yato, who is a god. Specifically a minor god that not many people know about, but wanting to make a name for himself, he hangs out around like high school bathrooms and tries to help students with errands. Anyway, one day he runs into Hiyori, who is a young girl that he saves from a traffic accident. But this accident causes her soul to separate from her body, and she starts having these out-of-body experiences where she can interact with Yato and the spirit world without being able to control them. While they're trying to figure this out, they meet the spirit of a young boy who died named Yukine, who Yato decides to take in as his shinki, which is sort of like an apprentice but also weapon. Like Yukine can turn into a sword that he can use to fight the bad evil spirits. You know the drill, man, we've done this type of stuff before. Anyway, so while Yato is working to rehabilitate Yukine, he is also trying to figure out how to fix Hiyori's condition. They all become good friends and have many wonderful misadventures together. But things do start to get a great deal more intense when we start to learn more about Yato's past and who he really is, and how he is drawn into the conflicts of the greater spirit world. Now, this was an interesting series, reading all the way through from the beginning, while knowing most of its fans did not have that smooth an experience with Noragami, because of how chopped up and delayed most of the release was. I do almost feel like a Noragami tourist, in a sense, because I was able to just binge it all in a few days. But I am very glad I did, because this is a great one, and I can easily see why it was so popular for a time. Like a lot of great modern battle manga, it doesn't reinvent the wheel by any means. A lot of this stuff is stuff we've seen before in various forms. I wouldn't even call Noragami like a fresh take on this topic, but it's just very solid and very refined. It knows exactly what it is, it does not waste time. The cast stays relatively small compared to a lot of battle manga, giving us a lot of time to flesh out the characters and their relationships, which is definitely one of the strongest points of the series. But it also presents us with a lot of great world building, a lot of really cool action, and led to many satisfying moments throughout its rather twisty story. And I kinda wish I had more to say about it, if I'm being honest. Because while I do think this series pulls off almost everything really well, I feel like I just got into it a bit too late. Like, if I had read this 10 years ago, I probably would have been absolutely obsessed with it, and it's definitely something I can recommend to battle manga fans, it. But like I said, it just doesn't really stand out to me necessarily as being like this god tier manga some people used to call it, and some still do. Like I said, I've seen all this stuff done before, and I've kind of seen it done better as well. That's not to discredit it, it was still very enjoyable. I just don't really see myself holding it on the same pedestal that some do. And I do have one kind of glaring issue with the series, and it's how it handles its romance. Yato and Hiyori here, our main characters, are, let's just say they're smitten with each other. And this never becomes a romance story, okay? That aspect never eclipses, like, the actual interesting stuff going on, thank God. But it's just a very strange romance that I don't like. And it has to do with Hiyori being 15. They really like to remind you that she's 15. And Yato, of course, being like over 1,000 years old. But then they introduce Yato's father, who is a prominent figure in the story, obviously much older than Yato, and also starts to go after Hiyori. And it's weird because I really love Yato's father as a character and, you know, the way his story plays out. But yeah, let me just say that there were a few things that this series did that I really didn't care for. But not a massive issue because, again, the series doesn't really focus on those elements. It feels more just like added for fan service. That aside, I thought Noragami was really solid. I'm definitely glad I read it. If you are a battle manga fan and haven't checked it out, I think it's definitely worth a read. Now we're going to shift gears into something much more current. This is the only manga today I'll be talking about that is still ongoing, and it is one that I have been a massive fan of for the past few years. Dandadan is the story of a boy and a girl and their experiences with the paranormal and the occult. Dandadan has such a fresh premise that seemed like such a no-brainer. You take aliens, you take ghosts, you smush them together, and you get one of the most inventive and bonkers manga that I have ever read. After discovering ghosts are real, that aliens are real, the girl Momo unlocks these psychic abilities, and the boy Okarun catches himself a bit of a curse and is able to morph into this moody, like, superpower form, and them along with their friends use these abilities to fight off supernatural threats, which can range from the urban legends that live in creepy tunnels and haunted houses, to invaders from the vast reaches of the galaxy. It's a series that blends these elements together so incredibly well, throwing in some amazing art and action, great humor, and does it all with such a fantastic passion and love for these genres that it is pulling from. One thing I always loved about the paranormal side of Dandadan is that they aren't just making stuff up or pulling from, you know, old legends and folklore, but a lot of the stuff in here is modern urban legends that you may have heard of completely separate from Dandadan. Stuff like that really shows that Tatsu, the author, you know, is really in tune to this stuff and is truly a really big fan of it. And that passion really just bleeds throughout all of the pages of Dandadan. There's just some excellent stuff in here. And it's not just carried by the premise and the action. The characters are all wonderful, and I loved all of their dynamics. Lots of characters are always being introduced, and they're usually like massive home runs that you'll love spending time with. I think the series is starting to become a bit overstuffed with just how many main characters there are, so I do hope it starts to slow down on that front, because I love so many of these guys and I really hope they don't start getting overshadowed. And this series does also have a romantic plot with Momo and Okarun, but unlike almost literally every battle shonen I've ever read, it's fantastic. It is one of the absolute highlights of Dandadan, which is weird to say because there's so much other great and crazy stuff going on. But the romantic plot between the two, it feels very genuine, very natural, and it's absolutely delightful how it progresses throughout the whole series. And like many battle manga, it's a series that is told throughout multiple different story arcs, usually with a new supernatural or, you know, alien villain showing up and them having to team up to take him down. For the most part, all of these arcs are big home runs for me. The best one by far being one that involves a character named Vamola. I don't want to say any more. No spoilers out of me. You gotta experience that for yourself, man. Though I do think there are some times that the arcs aren't quite as interesting as I would like them to be, especially with what came before. Namely, there's an isekai arc, which I loved the setup for, I loved the climax for, but the whole middle stretch, Oof. Definitely the most generic and least interesting section of the series. That kind of surprised me because it's usually just so creative and out there. But yeah, it does kind of just turn into a generic isekai for a little bit. Thankfully, it does get back on track. And I am quite enjoying the current stuff that is going on. Don't really know how much longer the series has. It kind of feels like we're at least in, like, I don't know, maybe the final third, but, you know, who can say with these things? And I really hope it continues to just be great and creative and stick the landing, because this is for sure one of my current favorites. Also, I gotta show some appreciation to the anime that's currently ongoing. Science Saruman, knocking it out of the park. I mean, it was pretty expected from them. But Dandadan's really getting one of those dream adaptations. And honestly, as good as the manga art is, I really don't think people should be missing out on that anime. It's fantastic, man. So I'm supposed to talk about Jujutsu Kaisen next. I don't really wanna. It's like, what, 10:30? I got work in the morning. My back is starting to hurt again. Oh no. Yeah, I'm gonna go sleep on it. I'll be back. Yowaimo! Alright, Jujutsu Kaisen by Gege Akutami. What can I even say? This is without a doubt one of the most popular manga of the modern era, and along with series like Demon Slayer and Chainsaw Man, contributed to the massive explosion in popularity manga has seen since COVID. It's one of those series that it seems like every new manga and anime fan has gotten into. More people probably know who Satoru Gojo is than, like, I don't know, Jiraiya from Naruto or something. Absurdly popular series. One that tells the story of Yuji Itadori as he attends Jujutsu High. This is a school that trains sorcerers to harness their spirit energy to use the Jujutsu arts to fight against curses and evil spirits. And he and his classmates are trained under the legendary Jujutsu sorcerer Satoru Gojo, and we follow them as they hone their skills and try to fight off the evil curses who want to kill them and take over the world. But the premise is not as straightforward as you think, because right from the very beginning, the stakes are actually astronomically high. Because the only reason Itadori is even here is because he accidentally became possessed by a legendary cursed spirit, Sukuna, whose destructive capabilities are unfathomable, and unless he can become a strong Jujutsu sorcerer and learn to control Sukuna inside of him, well, he's just gonna get executed. So the early parts of this series, while Itadori is doing like the usual shonen battle manga stuff, there is the constant threat that if he makes one slip up, he'll just get killed. It makes for a really strong hook throughout these early chapters when Jujutsu Kaisen is sort of just doing the normal battle manga thing. But you'll learn very quickly that Akutami isn't really here to play around. And while you may think the series is following a typical formula, it quickly grows into something much greater and much more insane. Just as we're learning more about who our antagonists are, they kinda catch us off guard and, for a genre that's very famous for pulling punches, this series does not. It constantly has high stakes that continue to grow exponentially. It is very unpredictable, and while it does follow, you know, the typical arc structure, what happens in those arcs will leave you speechless. It features some very unique, dynamic, and fluid art that lends to some absolutely incredible and memorably insane action. And, you know, I think the middle point of this series, the Shibuya Incident arc, which was adapted phenomenally in the second season of the anime, is hands down one of the best battle manga arcs I have ever read. And there are some reasons for that, but I feel like it would be best to talk about them by comparing this first half of the series to the second half. Now, some people like to say that Jujutsu Kaisen had a generational fall-off, and not to feed into the negativity, but yeah, kinda. The series had such a good thing going, but I think, like, at a certain point after the Shibuya incident, we do get some interesting setup afterwards. But I think once the next big arc gets started, Akutami just kinda, I think gets caught up in the hype. Caught up in trying to continually raise the stakes without really having a plan for where things were going. One of Jujutsu Kaisen's biggest strengths, the reason so much of the Shibuya incident hits hard, is because like Noragami, it has a very relatively small and manageable cast. Jujutsu High does not have many students, and while yes, there are a lot of sorcerers and villains, it's all very manageable, and most of them are very great. Really awesome and iconic characters. Some of them might not have as much depth as others, but they're all very well rounded and very fun to follow. But in the second half, Akutami just decides to vomit out a bunch of new ones, a bunch of lame ones, and just seemingly does away with so many fan favorites. You know, some may die in natural ways, but there's a bunch that are like still alive, and I'm just like, where the hell are these people? What's going on? I kid you not, there was like a 30-40 chapter stretch without Itadori, our main character, and there's no reason for it. The series just completely shifts its focus to like all of these, well, they're essentially filler battles following characters we don't care about. And then the series sort of reshifts its focus to a weird and awkward final arc that doesn't really conclude the last one, but it kind of feels like Akutami just kind of gave up on what that was setting up, and it becomes a real mess. And one of the big reasons for that comes from Jujutsu Kaisen's magic system. A system that is a double-edged sword and can be very challenging for authors to work with because it is very flexible. You can do a lot of stuff with Jujutsu magic, and it leads to a lot of the battles being very unpredictable. Like almost anything can happen. But at the same time, this comes with a lot of rules, a lot of complexity, and it can sometimes get a bit overwhelming even in the first half of the series, but it usually gets by on just being super cool, and you understand it just enough that, you know, everything makes sense and falls into place. But in the second half, it really starts to become very cumbersome to the point where we have chapters where characters are just vomiting out exposition and rules of how these weird-ass powers work, and I feel like all, like, the really cool ones were used up at the beginning of the series. And the actual, like, ending of this manga is honestly extremely laughable. The ending of Bleach is kind of infamous because, you know, it was super rushed. The way they deal with, like, the final fight is just kind of a joke. This is worse than Bleach's ending, on God. Like, I still cannot believe the nonsense they pulled at the very end here. And it's really upsetting because at a point, I literally considered this one of the best battle manga I had read. And I really, really wish it could have kept that momentum, but it really fell apart at the end. And it's unfortunately one of those series where, like, yeah, the ending is kind of important. Like, you can't just stop after the Shibuya incident. And it really sours the whole experience and makes it just a bit harder to recommend. Though, I still think I would recommend this one, as the parts that are good are so good. And, you know, it's such an iconic series. Even if you do quit after Shibuya, I do still think it's worth experiencing, either the manga or the admittedly incredible anime adaptation. I don't know the behind-the-scenes story of this, but, you know, it really just feels like to me Akutami sorta got a bit too ambitious and wasn't really prepared for it. So those are my thoughts on these three interesting series, and they all go to show just how different stories based on similar things can be. All of them are based in Japanese folklore and deal with, you know, spirits and curses, but they are all so vastly different. So, you know, when people like to talk about how oversaturated the market is with, you know, these similar types of stories, I generally don't think that matters if they can manage to stand out in their own unique ways. I mean, that's the same reason why medieval fantasy books can still do so well. It's just the quality of the writing and the quality of the ideas. And for the most part, all of these manga have those things. Not really the second half of Jujutsu Kaisen, but everything else I talked about, yeah, slaps. And even though I have largely moved away from reading manga, series like these are the reasons that I'll never give it up, because there is still so much creativity and great storytelling to be found within them. So with that, thank you all so much for watching. Leave your thoughts on anything manga related in the comments down below. Like I said, I'll be getting a review out for Vinland Saga soon. That'll probably be the next big manga content for the rest of the year. But for now, it's going to be back to novels. I have a Katabasis review coming out in a little bit, and I'll of course do the Poppy War after that. And it won't be too much longer now before my next Wheel of Time video.